Good morning. Good afternoon. The Dharma talk for this Wednesday. This is the 19th of August. 19th of August, 2020 is an, what do they call it? Unexplored?
Ignored.
I called it ignored. That's even better. An ignored frontier. It's interesting. I give something a name and then I forget what I named it. And then I have to ask somebody what I said. You'll get old too, and you'll see what it's like. That's a frontier you all have to look at. So what I'm talking about here, and I can use some questions once I get going here, then questions, and please don't hesitate. I can't really talk about something you're not ready to hear. So the ignored frontier is, of course, the mind. All over the place. It's ignored. It's just used. It's called materialism, scientific materialism, materialism, every kind of materialism. Wanting this, not wanting that, wanting to control, wanting to gather, wanting to consume. And it's based on all kinds of things that have been around for millions of years, called hunger, craving, of various sorts, wanting something else. And we tend to overdo that, and it makes things complicated. And things change from this to that, to this to that, but nothing fundamentally terminates. Things change into something else, or at least appears that way. Dogen would disagree. He says firewood does not become ash. Of course, he's taking an obvious assumption that everyone has and just saying, not exactly that. We don't need to talk about Dogen's teaching. I've given talks on that topic before. Of course, we can, if you have some especially new query about that dynamic. We can go into that if you wish. But what I would really like to do is talk about deeper, to use the relative term, deeper or more hidden or more disguised or camouflaged areas of consciousness that most of the world, most of us, most meditators don't even see. Even famous, skilled, highly accomplished wisdom people don't know about this. I'm not saying they don't know for sure, but they aren't sure enough about it to bring it into their teachings or talk about it, because what if they're wrong? Or perhaps there's not enough evidence. All evidence is partial. You're only going to get half truths. As long as you're looking for truth, in that sense of proof of truth, then you're going to get you're not going to get a complete backup that you are looking for, just because of the nature of reality, relative truth, ultimate truth. So the areas I'm talking about are when we do sitting meditation and we go and we work with pardon me, we work with the areas that show up in our mind that take us this way, take us that way, cause us to fret and worry, to feel discouraged, to feel that we're failing, feel that we're succeeding, for that matter. Just any kind of movement away from this and towards that, it tends to get accompanied with the production of our mind, letting us know what's happening. So we have an idea. So we know if we're getting somewhere, if we're accomplishing something, if this is valuable. Here I've been spending all this time facing a wall. Should I be doing this? What have I gotten out of this? It's a difficult area. It can be very difficult unless you have a deeper understanding of the nature of consciousness and of your life as a human being. Most religious traditions have different kinds of dynamics that deal with deeper levels of consciousness. The Tibetans do, the Shinto, the Buddhist, Taoist, and also all kinds of shamanistic approaches, and other cultures that have a spiritual path that tends to show up in different ways. So I'm just saying that's a very, very vast and basically unexplored when I say it's unexplored, quite often if people get into that area, they begin to conclude too quickly, and because the needing a conclusion is a part of the self-centeredness. Seems to take someone who is not looking for something to really see clearly. One of the ways that this has shown up in my experience as a Dharma teacher, meeting hundreds of people as a meditation students since I first became trained by Chogyam Trungpa in 1978 to teach meditation. I was taught to teach Shine Laktung, or mindfulness awareness. Shamatha Vipassana is often mostly called. Shamatha is resting in tranquility or calm abiding. And then Vipassana is a panoramic, or the awareness that spreads itself out. It is said in that teaching, the way it was taught then, and the way I was taught, is that first you practice shamatha and you stabilize, and you learn to stabilize, and you practice so that you become more and more stable. And then after you have this great stability, this calm abiding, this resting in tranquility, then and only then, it seems, not here to correct anyone, that you can begin to expand out of that base of that you could say immovable or secure base of being in the body-mind complex. And so I did quite a bit of that. But what I would run into with people that I met were off and on, even today, is people who would have meditators who were meditating, who had different kinds of experiences that were unexplainable. It's difficult to just tell somebody, well, that's just an illusion, or that's, as the Japanese would say, that's makyo, or illusion. Go back and sit more. Go back and sit more. Because the idea there is that, however you're teaching this, you're assuming that everyone's going to have very similar kind of experience with consciousness that you are, or that other people have agreed upon that is the nature of it. Just like the model for consciousness in Mahayana Buddhist approach, Zen and Chan Buddhism, is the Yogacara teaching of the 8 consciousnesses. I think it's a very good structure to the first 5 of the sense fields. The 6th one is the mechanical processing aspect of the mind that takes the first 5 and brings them together in such a way that it looks like they're all coming from the same consciousness, the same individual, which is and then leads into other forms or definitions or explanations or considerations about the functioning of consciousness. For instance, the 7th consciousness, or the klesha mind, the disturbed mind, the paranoid mind, the mind that thinks it needs protecting, the mind that thinks it needs has a sense of some kind of self-priority, that aspect of the consciousness. And then the alaya vijnana, which is the divided aspect, or the storage area of the consciousness. Just a way of talking about it. We don't know for sure what's happening there. No one knows for sure. But since no one does know, people tend to use that in different ways. Different teachings and different teachers would use those ideas. They're pretty good. They're a pretty good way to look at the way the mind functions, to fight with itself, to struggle, to get something else. To empower greed, and also to look at greed or grasping or covetousness in such a way that we can see that it's not just the greed and the grasping, the covetousness, it's the identity that seems to be lurking in the shadows of that particular structure we call the 7th consciousness. It's seeing that it is unreal, rather than trying to find some way to tamp those emotions, feelings, contractions, expansions, and so on. Based on self-centeredness, based on wanting things to be different, as the Buddha said. So what I was endeavoring to introduce a little bit, and I'd love to have questions about this in another few minutes, is say that consciousness, just say it as descriptively as possible, has so many different levels. There are uncountable levels and areas of consciousness that, even though consciousness looks like one thing, and we can all agree, if we talk about what did you dream, we immediately know what we mean by a dream. But your experience of a dream and my experience of a dream, or your experience of a nightmare, my experience, your experience of a lucid dream, which is one where you realize you're dreaming, or your experience of having astral projection, or actually moving through space where you can see the landscape, and my experience, or lack that, never having had that experience, and someone tells you about that, and you could think, well, not so sure about that. But there's a tremendous amount of people that have those experiences, and these are people who are different kinds of travelers, either voluntary, trying to do that, or involuntary, just spontaneous body consciousness dislocating. Sometimes I have had students who come in and sit down in the meditation hall, and since they always dislocate and are able to see their body from 30 feet away in the Zendo, they think that's happening to everyone. And so when they bring it up and find out that isn't happening to everyone, they kind of quiet about it. They don't want to look too weird, but they think it's just ordinary to have that happen. Just like lucid dreaming or bilocation, being in two places at the same time. If that's happening to you quite a bit, you're probably not going to talk about it, because you find nobody else has that experience. and you don't want to have a discussion about something that you can't prove. Have to be a pretty close friend or mate, or have to be a close person to be able to discuss that with them. And the very nature, I'm sure you've noticed in your mind, the very nature of your mind, if you begin to look at it closely, instead of getting more and more clear based on your idea, more clear based on your idea of clarity, it starts to get more complicated, more confused. That's where the temptation to grasp onto concepts, ideas, and beliefs becomes really strong. And we start to look around for possibly another teaching, possibly another teacher. Possibly we don't even want to meditate. This might be too hard for us. We might even say this may not be our lifetime to do this. And perhaps not. You should trust yourself. When I say that, trust the space in which the thoughts occur, not the thoughts themselves. If you do that, then the thoughts that occur in that space will come into that space with a kind of resonance that will be fundamentally helpful to you, because there isn't anything separate from this. It's called suchness. It's called Tathagata Garbha. It's called, simply put, in everyday language, it's called basic goodness. It's just basically good, basically sacred. There isn't any polarity to it. We need a polarized kind of word, because what else are we going to do? Call it cheesecake. So the first, I'm not going to go through a big list, but began looking at working with people's consciousnesses many, many years ago. People with past life experiences that seemed like that. People that had, other people that don't have anything like that, have no idea what people are even talking about and think it's a hoax. And then other people who have experience with and as aliens, when I just using aliens because it's a term that comes around quite a bit with people's different stories, movies, and so on. Don't ignore that. You don't have to join it either. You don't have to go out and read a bunch of books on that, as I have. But you could consider it. Consider it. Just consider that that's a possibility. Imagine what it's like for someone who is having an experience of having an intense relationship with a being who is not human. You can't just continually write those things off as they're crazy or they're psychotic or they're not that those things don't show up in some cases. But if you meet someone like that and you talk to them and you see the sincerity that is there, that has continuity, you can't dispute that. Quite well-known Harvard psychologist John Mack, who wrote a book called Abduction that I read many, many years ago. He's passed away now in the early 90s. Really powerful book where he interviewed people with had abduction experiences, or were being taken into deeper layers of consciousness and had experiences there. So I'm not saying this is true, but what you hear me say over and over again is don't believe it, Don't disbelieve it and don't ignore it. It's very simple. All it means is look at it, and watch the way the ego mind wants to conclude. You don't have to conclude. You don't have to conclude anything. The world is just fine without your conclusions, without your meddling. Just observe. Just receive this life. Live your life and receive what comes your way without struggle, without acceptance, without rejection, and without ignoring. So anyway, rather than go into detailed discussions or just detailed descriptions of individuals' situations or situations that have come across in people who have been meditation students and other levels or other ways of exploring or looking into this based on other people's experiences, books that have been written. There's just a tremendous amount of material out there on deeper levels of consciousness that are not necessarily covered in Buddhism. And when it does show up in that area, quite often it's tamped down. You can't. I'm saying if you have a teaching person that doesn't have that experience, might have lots of other experiences, might be profoundly awakened and be able to help people work with their mind. But if they don't have an understanding of deep layers of consciousness, then they will do what? More than likely will have presumptions about it. Don't do that. You don't need to. You can just continually not know. To not know is actually, that's the dimension in which one becomes, to use the common word, educated. People who know don't go to college, simply put. So not knowing is not such a bad, difficult dynamic to way to describe your consciousness. There's lots of things I could talk about here, but based on what I'm saying here, I'm just saying that a person, to go a little further with, I'm saying that the difficulty you're having with your mind may not just be your own individuality. There's lots of room. That area of the mind, the consciousness, the dream world, what's called in the Tibetan tradition the bardo, or the intermediate state between this life and that area is that has its reality, and the rules there, or the dynamics there, are quite a bit different. In some way, they're more intense than they are here. And when I say intense, they're more solid in their ability to morph from one thing to another. You can't track anything in that area. There's no time, and there's fundamentally no three-dimensional space. There's space, but it's a different kind of space. The example I often use, if you want to know what kind of space I'm talking about, I'm going to say a pink grapefruit cut in half, laying on a red table, and the knife just falls off on the floor. You see that in your mind, or in whatever kind of dynamic you have, you're experiencing in some way what I'm saying, and that the space in which you experience that that's the kind of space that I'm pointing to. That is an area that can be explored. That is an ignored area, because if something shows up there, the human mind that is embodied is so intensely grounded in this physical gravity. Smell, taste, touch, all the sense fields are constantly telling you, you're here. This is it. And of course, the teachings quite often, in most cases, will actually start out with your groundedness. Be grounded, sit down, hold still, feel the body on the floor, on the ground, looking at the wall, and stabilize yourself in that way by holding still. And then watch what continues to move. And eventually, when it's time for you to go into those deeper layers of consciousness, if at all, it will begin to open up. But the experience you have and the experience someone else has may not particularly match up, or even resonate, or even be in the same solar system. So this is why I often say to students of mine, talk about your practice a little bit, but not too much. Don't compare notes about what's happening in your consciousness. Discuss the Dharma, discuss Dogen, discuss 30 verses of Vasubandhu, talk about it. Study all this material we study 8, 9 times a day. More than that if you count all the other things that are going on, Dharma talks and so on. But what's happening in your consciousness, track that. In other words, watch what's happening there, but don't cut into that particular way of that particular kind of subjectivity by taking it back out of there and explaining it to someone. See if they're having the same experience. There's no way you can describe what's happening. It's like trying to describe water to somebody who comes from the land of rocks. Well, it's kind of like a rock that's limp. No, it's not like that either. It's like rocks that drip. No, that won't work. And it's a silly example, but it's that kind of a thing. It's the same for someone who really enjoys this kind of music and not sure why, but they love this music, and another kind they don't like, but somebody else who likes the kind they don't like. Music is and any kind of music or literature, art always shows up lots of differences in people's what do they call it, taste. And if you don't like the kind of music they like, their opinion of you might drop a little bit. They're not going to appreciate you too much if you like some kind of music that they don't care for. Have you noticed that? Or am I barking up the wrong pile of rocks? We'll take some questions now. If you have questions about this material, I'm not afraid to go any direction with it. Let's go.
Is I'm bowing. When we begin to see or look at that our experience may not be arising out of our particular individuality, how can that help us alleviate our suffering? Or how does that help us work with suffering? Bowing.
Because you're looking at the very nature of the mind. And the mind, the suffering comes from the separation, the area of separation. And that separation just isn't here on this planet, on this earth, between you and your mother, you and your enemy. Or it isn't just that. It's much, much deeper, that more profound and vast. Start somewhere. Start with your own mind. Sit down, hold still, as I say over and over and over again. If you hold still and just watch what's moving, then because of the dependent origination that functions within you as a parent person with these nostrils, these ears, these hands, and this particular body-mind makeup, whatever you need to see, the less you do, the more that's going to show up in front of you, so that you can actually work with that particular element. And so it's just that it brings you into the area that the main difficulty is. Like Atisha's 7 points of mind training says, work with the greatest defilements first. And they might be any number of things, and they might change. You might start out with ignoring, or that you're ignoring it a lot. You're distracting yourself from things. You're a very obvious form of it. But that can also turn up in other ways. The more you work with it, the more you do sitting meditation, the deeper you will go into this material. Good question. Keep coming. Anyone?
Is I'm bowing. Is there something outside of the sense fields that we have to investigate these areas that do not seem to be rooted in the senses? Bowing.
Yes. In the 5 sense fields, that area is sense of touch, sense of taste, sense of hearing, sense of smell, sense of seeing. Most people are locked down into that and just think that the mind is who they are. I am so and so, and I can touch. I'm so and so, and I'm looking at that. I'm so and so, and I'm a truck driver, or I'm a president of the AFL-CIO. I mean, some kind of dynamic, some kind of identity structure that keeps all of that together. But yes, you've meditated enough. You tell me what that's like when you sit down and spend hours looking at the nature of the mind and how that functions. And it's different for different people. Some people have a different experience of those deeper dimensions. Some people won't go there. They know about it, but they will not go there. They'll stabilize themselves away from that. But that's still awareness. It's still awareness. Awareness isn't necessarily about oh, I'm so aware now, I'm just going to go do this. No, it's seeing the way you've been holding back. It's looking at the boundaries and the obstacles to going deeper into those layers of consciousness or awareness. Keep going.
Kevin Bowing.
Kevin.
Sokuzan, how can we explore something we can't see? Bowing.
Well, you can see, if I say 2 carrots and a radish, can you see them?
Boy, howdy.
Boy, howdy.
Yeah.
Why did you look at just the carrot? You don't care for radishes?
Well, a little goes a long way.
I should have thought about who I'm talking to. Yeah. So I'm just saying that the mental dimension, because it's not defined by what arises in it, as our room is, our furniture in our room, that's a kind of space, very practical, pragmatic, and is relatively dependable, relatively. But the mind is just like the location there. You can't find, you can imagine a room, but you can't. But even if you look in the corners of a room you've imagined, they change, they disappear, the walls fall down. If you try to remember somebody's face, and you might get a flash of it. There's a second there where you hear them, and then but you can't maintain it a little bit. And some people may be able to maintain more than others. This is one of this strengthening. This is one of the practices that is used in creation completion practices of tantric Buddhism, which Tantra is, of course, the texts that support that teaching and the actual practices of Tantra, which are creation, completion, visualization, sometimes called deity yoga. You're visualizing really, really complicated things. And of course, the experience is how difficult it is, even though you might have done it hundreds and thousands of times, you still can't quite hold this chakra, this chakra, and that chakra, and the deity in each one, around whose heart center there's a mantra is rotating in a language that you don't understand. So that's one of the visualizations. I'm not poo-pooing that or making fun of it. I'm just saying that's one way of training the mind. And even that is still has its limitations. And what is the limitation? The mind can see that, but it can't control it in the same way that we can control this world here, where we can grasp onto something. And when we have some kind of feedback that I have hands, this is a kotsu or a stick, and it's there, and it's not disappearing. But in a dream, those of you who have had lucid dreams, that's a really powerful thing, because in a lucid dream, there's that, for those of you who have had that, you could also read about it, or there's ways to develop this, that you're in a situation, you know you're dreaming, you know that everything you're looking at looks real, but you know it's unreal, and all you have to do is think something, and what's in the dream begins to change. And if you try to walk into something, it can stop you. But if you realize that you're in a dream, then you can walk right through it. And it's still illusory. It's still an illusory situation. And this is one of the to jump into a completely different direction for a minute. This is one of the ideas around alien abduction, for people who have these really, if you've read any of this material, it is incredible material that just by people's experiences are incredibly intense and believable, even though they're bizarre. But taking people through walls into flying vehicles, and having some kind of understanding about the nature of matter, that there seems to be some possibility of actually moving through. So we don't know if the bodies are actually going through there, or if there's some kind of a dream body is being moved. They're just, and of course, what do people look for? Proof. Are there any marks on them? Do they have any, this happened, this happened? Is there any proof? Is there any marks on the body, and so on? Not incorrect, but very few people, I don't know of anybody that's actually trying to do this with the consciousness itself, or trying to explore that area. And I'm not recommending you do that. I don't teach classes on how to figure out how aliens move from the ship from your bedroom to their ship and take you along with them. But it seems to happen an awful lot for it to be untrue. on some level. Further questions? This is a good area. Not an area I talk about much. So if you have questions about it, you should drag them out of me.
Sokuzan, with the example that you gave of the alien abduction, you said that to explore it with the consciousness itself. So what does it look like to continue to explore something like that with the consciousness itself?
Has that happened to you?
I think so.
Well, explore it with your consciousness. Or not. The only thing I require as a meditation student is you sit down, hold still, and watch the movement of your mind. And that will train your mind. And I trust, to use that kind of a word, I trust or I feel that if you do that, any direction you need to go will show up as being choiceless for you. I don't think we all need to take on the project of exploring alien abduction necessarily. And unless that's something that is plaguing you or something you're having difficulty with, everybody has a little bit of an experience like that. I would say most people, maybe not all of them, but some people do. I don't know if I could say most. I haven't taken a survey, but it seems like it. Have some experience, and others have had none. And they're not. That's to them. That's just bizarre, and it's probably a sign of psychosis or some other conception. I'd say don't conclude anything. Give everything a benefit of the doubt. That's a very bizarre area. And I would say if you're not particularly disturbed or plagued by it, I wouldn't do anything with it other than watch the things that are plaguing you and disturbing you. You know what those are. We've discussed it. And I would, as it says in it, Tisha says, work on the greatest defilements first. Whatever it is that you're, and if I haven't told you as your teacher, you can come and ask me. You probably already know. Probably already know what that is. And when you say work on it, all we're saying is that might show up as your particular way of doing it. I'm not saying you sit at the cushion and contemplate how angry you are. You can sit at when you sit at the cushion, all you're really doing is watching what moves. And whatever is moving, that tends to, over time, if you're not objecting to it, you're not agreeing with it, you're not ignoring it, then the awareness itself, the actual witnessing part of the consciousness becomes very powerful. It's not a person who's witnessing something. It's just awareness is no longer tied down to an identity of me and my stuff, my ideas, my hopes, my fears. Your awareness is, if it continues that way, will be liberated. At the same time, you're still in a human form, but you're not particularly a human, and you realize it, even though you're in a human form. Don't believe a word I say, but don't ignore it. You've heard me say that many times. Further?
Kevin, morning.
Yes.
Sokuzan, to what degree do affirmations help us to explore or work with this mental space that we ignore? Bowing.
Okay. So, if we start out and say we're just the topic of affirmations, okay, which 5,682 billion affirmations are you talking about? Because affirmations are so varied, and not that there aren't a few that we all consider affirmations, but there's different kinds of them. And I would say that's powerful. It depends on how you work with it. It depends on how persistent you are and how greedy you are for results. Because the result that when you have an affirmation, if there's not openness to what that affirmation is actually leading to, and rather you have some kind of an agenda about the affirmation, then you might as well be playing Monopoly. When I say that, I don't mean to demean anyone's affirmations. You can do whatever you want with affirmation. We do it all the time at the monastery by saying, supplicating beings in the light. I don't know if there's any beings in the light or not. Of course, it's full of beings. They're all made of light. That's why you can't see them. Interact with me around that, and you'll get dizzy, because I don't have a conclusion about it, and yet I know and I don't know that's a complete reality. It's complete reality, even though where is it? So supplicate. Pray for the welfare of others. Ask those energies cannot do anything unless you supplicate, unless you ask them. May all beings be happy and at their ease. Very simple. May all beings. We do this. This whole area was very difficult for me when I first ran into this back when I met Trungpa Rinpoche. Took a while.
Kevin Bowing, I'm thinking, on the mundane level, there's the looking in the mirror and telling yourself how fabulous and how many friends you have while you're lonely and everybody hates you. There's that kind of like affirmation, which science says like makes you feel worse about yourself if you're lying to yourself. But I remember specifically last summer when we were working with Chiezan in lucid dreaming, there are affirmations in that in which one says like, I remember my dreams and so on and so forth, when you may well not do that. Like, so how is that? I understand vaguely about aspiring to or supplicating, but how does saying to yourself something that isn't actually your experience, planting a seed of suggestion to fertilize? I'm sorry, but I'm getting lost.
Yeah, I can see you are. What's your question?
My question is, if what we are stating as a truth in the affirmation, like I remember my dreams, how does that help us to remember our dreams when in the saying of it that doesn't match our current experience?
Yeah, I think it's just a way of shifting our attention. There's no demand there. We're just if there's a strong demand, a requirement, or a strong grasping activity, then it may not. It may you could say backfire, may not work, or it may not show up as something, or it may seem like a waste of time. But cause and effect, I think that's what we're working with there, and I think some of what Chiezan was coming out of was stuff he had been trained, as I recall, and I'm not for that or against it. I would say, look at it, see what it's like. Work with Chiezan's has had quite a bit of experience with dream states. Also, the Buddhist teacher Andrew Holacek has a lot to say about that, as do those who teach dream yoga and all of that. I'm not promoting anything. I'm not really promoting anything other than train your mind, and whatever arises in consciousness, don't accept it, don't reject it, and don't look away. That's the basic thing that I encourage people to do. I'm just saying that the reason I'm giving this talk in this way is there's a incredible depth to consciousness that it goes so deep that there's not even a metaphor for it, other than look at the ground, and then if you want to see the contrast, look out into space, especially at night. And then it gives you a feeling of how, as they say, fathomless space. It's fathomless. That means there's no fathoms there. Whereas in the ocean, it's got a few fathoms. So I would say affirmations in terms of I'm going to remember my dreams. I think it's just a very simple changing of your, just like say, I will save all beings. I vow to be with all things, even though we continually see how that doesn't quite work, or we can't do that. But we aspire to do that. Just like if left on its own, the ego mind will just continue to chew on whatever it can and spit out what it doesn't want. Very, very much in a very self-centered kind of way. But if we have a kind of glimpse, which is called bodhicitta, we have a glimpse that there's a fundamental reality that by being so self-centered and so greedy and so protective and so paranoid and so and so proud or so ashamed or so all of the different things that happen to us through conditioned arising, through just not just your mom and your dad or your particular incarnation, but everything is just hammering at us constantly, that's saying you're this, you're that, you shouldn't be this, you should do that, you shouldn't do that, what about this, what about that? And it becomes in Buddhism it's called the 10,000 things. And this is why why monks in ancient times socially distanced way before this started than going into the mountaintop and just get away from everything and just train the mind. Doesn't show up that way here so much, but we do some of that. So we pull out of the society, out of our relationships with people, and for a few days, 10 days, 20 days, or 100 days, whatever it may be, sit down and just work with our mind so that we can see more clearly. The shall we say, space of your existence, your life, your consciousness, not just this body. It's just so expansive, way beyond anything that this simple situation of sitting in a room, listening to someone talk. It's so vast and extensive, but we don't see it because we're enamored of and we're entrained or hypnotized by our thought patterns and our ideas and our valuations and our judgments and what's got to be cleaned and when to take the trash out and all of the things that have got us going, and the interaction with other people who like us, who don't like us, who have a problem with something we said or did. And so there's all those complications. And of course, in the Sangha, it's same situation, except then in some ways it's even harder because now you're working with people who are actually trying to train their mind. They're trying to be sincere. They are endeavoring to be honest and genuine and forthright and so on. And still the abrasiveness still shows up there, which of course is why we train our minds and why we try to study the teachings. We study bodhicitta. We study relative bodhicitta, just basically working with others in a relative way. And then ultimate bodhicitta is to see that this is unreal. As solid and real as this sound, it is impermanent and unreal, and it is changing.
Shoto bowing.
Shoto.
Sometimes you'll bring up the concept of speed when talking about different levels of consciousness. Something like this might be going slower, and I can hold on to it. When two people are showing up at different speeds, how can communication occur?
The one who's going slower listens. That's the only way. There isn't any other way to do it. Unless there's that other way I haven't thought of, or the other way that somebody else is teaching in Utah. I don't know, but that's how it looks to me. My experience over time is if somebody is speedy, just receive. If it's really difficult with that person, then you might have to limit the time you spend with them. But you can do that in a respectful way. But it allows that person to by talking to you, by speaking to you, or by being very speedy or very active or very even aggressive in their speediness, you just be with them. They may find possibly that the only other people that'll meet them where they're at are the people that meet them with speed, which is recognizable. So that's more mirror-like to them. You don't have to do that. The more profound mirror is when they can see the speediness by your stillness. Powerful. You get no credential for it. They're not going to congratulate you. They might not even realize you're helping them.
Shadow bowing. When I happen to be the person that might have more relative feedback that my reality is correct.
I can't believe you're talking about yourself. Your reality is correct. Mm-hmm. Tell me more.
How can I see this? Someone else that's showing up differently isn't showing up incorrectly.
Yeah, that's a powerful question. Thank you. You won't be able to see it as evidence. They won't show up in their activity or their obvious lack of correctness, but it will show up when you see that you are putting something on that. You're adding what they're actually doing is what they're doing, and you may be correct and incorrect or whatever, but it's your addition onto it that is that it's your end. That's why all dharmas are without blame, and that's why you can blame everything on yourself. I mean, if you listen to that slogan, drive all blames into one. Take responsibility for everything. That doesn't mean that you're a terrible, evil person. It just means that you can do that. More about that or less?
Show bowing. Does investigating deeper layers of consciousness offer us something that the surface doesn't?
What I'm talking about is meditation practice. So I'm just this is what I'm talking about here. I'm just bringing up that there are different ways of working with consciousness. Years ago, back in the 1960s, I started out working with what's commonly called hypnosis or trance states, and I'm not recommending that. I'm just saying that there's lots of different ways of working with the mind. Other than just the sitting practice of meditation. Sitting practice of meditation, without that, all those other ones will take you into some kind of grasping or rejecting or some kind of wanting to prove something or wanting to find out something and wanting some kind of a credential for it. It'll be more about you and what you're doing rather than what it is that you're actually looking at. Because what you're looking at, you won't see unless you train your mind. And I can tell you what you're looking at any time. It's not separate. It's not something else. You're always looking at yourself. If that's if you see this, an alien can come into your bedroom tonight. I'm not saying you won't be startled, but you won't be afraid. I mean, look at Chazon. He practices on bats. I mean, what's scarier than a bat in the middle of the night where you can feel that it's fanning your face? Yeah. Not easy.
Junshu Bowing.
Go ahead, Junshu.
There are quite a few questions on YouTube.
Good.
The first is from Benjamin Swartout. He asks, what about the influence of the planets? Is there Tibetan or Zen astrology?
Well, there's Tibetan astrology, and then there's people who are Zen Buddhists who are astrologers. So yes, I'm being silly, but I'm saying yes, all cultures have some form of looking at something that's predictable. They want to find something that keeps doing the same thing, and this is so. Looking up at the stars, in ancient times they saw that this happened. Every time this happened, that happened. Every time this happened, that happened. Started keeping track of it and drawing conclusions. People want to know what this is. It's been very mysterious. So that's another way of working with it. Yeah, I would say there's all kinds of astrology tends to come from different cultures. Vedic astrology, there's Tibetan that works with the whole thing a little bit differently and just talk, but it is basically talking about the elements and cycles: fire, earth, water, air, and also the cyclic movement of different planets, also fixed stars, constellations, asteroids, and using those as little clock hands, so to speak. Further question?
His next question. Same question from Benjamin again. What is meant by one taste, and how does a being reintegrate and embrace the pleasure of unique taste after realizing the true or one taste that is beyond distinction?
Boy, you ought to teach a class on that. So Rochig is a Tibetan for one taste. It is a teaching that is basically an ultimate teaching that it was spit out in a relative way to say that everything you see has one flavor. There's no elseness to it. When you see one taste, you taste one taste, you see one. It could be said you only see one thing, but that might be extra. One taste is interesting, using the sense of taste because it is so intimate. It's like the sense of smell is so intimate. It's so intimate, you can't really describe it to anyone. If you taste something, you can't describe how zucchini tastes to someone who's never tasted it. There's no way. But you can describe how something looks. A cloud, well, it's puffy, and it's, what do you mean by puffy? Well, like cotton. What's cotton? Well, that's that stuff that, it goes on and on. You have to have some kind of a metaphor for every damn thing. So I would say I'll endeavor to answer your question. And I would say one taste is a teaching device or expression to help the yogi or the yogini or the practitioner to stop differentiating. You don't have to get rid of desire. It's the differentiation that needs to be seen between liking this and not liking that based on taste or based on all it's really addressing is pain and pleasure, sour and sweet. They're just tastes. So you could say that if they're just tastes, then it's just one taste. Rochig. And it's not an event. It's not something that, oh, I used to be confused by that, but now I see exactly what it means. Unlikely that will occur. If it does, come and see me. I'd like to hear all about it. If that sounds challenging, it is. It's a challenge. I'm looking forward to meeting enlightened people. Send them my way.
A question from Susan in Traverse City.
Susan and Traverse City, right ahead.
Are fractals a useful model for the awareness of how deeper perception operates?
Yeah, you could use any kind of a physical, or physics metaphor. Quite often that's used to, like particles and waves. They can't tell the difference. They look like when you get really into a really tiny area, it's hard to tell what the basic substance is. Even the early Buddhists were talking about, the atomists were talking about that everything comes down to just some kind of a basic building block. But that doesn't seem to be fundamentally true. It has a truth to it, a kind of truth, because we have atoms, we have molecules. But if you keep going, even those tend to have parts. Everything has parts. If it looks like something, reflect on this for a moment. If it looks like something, and then it has parts. If it looks like a person, we start out with the 5 skandhas, and then you can go into each one of those and break all those parts down. I suggest you start with the first skandha, the body, and then with that you start with the digestive tract. Let's break that all down into the smallest pieces. Or you could just go into the femur. Look at all the, have you ever looked at a list of femur parts? No, because they're waiting for you to make that list. I'm just saying that everything has a sense of being particles because of the first imputation that it's something. The somethingness, the separation of I'm here, that's over there. The objectivity of things is incredibly powerful. You don't have to get rid of that. You don't have to get rid of the subjectivity. Just see that it's unreal. If you see this is unreal, that will start to fade also, or it will take on a different dynamic.
Another question from Benjamin.
Please.
Regarding meta practice supplications, who are we asking? How can we relate to the ones we are asking without picturing or idolizing them?
You can go ahead and picture and idolize. I mean, if you want to, but you don't need to. You can just ask. Just asking. And then any kind of energy, any kind of a quality that is there, you're addressing that. And if you need to use some kind of a deity form like Kuan Yin or like Avalokiteshvara or Chenrezig, you need to use something other, then that's what deity yoga practices are about, to give you some kind of a structure, just like you visualize yourself as Avalokiteshvara, or you visualize yourself as a white Tara, green Tara, or Vajra Yogini, Vajrasattva. Gives you a kind of a mental picture so that you can work with that in your mind. The same way with if you're doing white Tara practice, it's a deity yoga where you visualize white Tara, and in her heart center, she's generating all kinds of goodness and happiness and long life and all the positive things you can see, and you're visualizing them go to others. You're visualizing them using your imagination. So it's just a way of exercising that kind of direct, intentional compassion. Maitri Bhavana.
Another question from Benjamin.
Yes.
When we ask, may all beings be at their ease, I recognize that each person has a unique ease, yet how do I cultivate allowing them to have their ease rather than what I imagine ease may be?
Train your mind. Before you start doing that, sit for a couple of hours. And then at the end of that, then you can dedicate the merit, or you can supplicate for all beings. But first, find out who the supplicator is, rather than create some kind of a really kind, loving person who's trying to help others. Do that too, but find out who you are. Sit down. Look at one of the best ways to that I would talk about it is to develop that kind of generosity and that kind of compassion for others, is to not only to supplicate or to do it that way, but also look at how what a tightwad you are. Not that you're stingy. I mean, everybody has a little bit of tightening up area where they just don't want to quite let go. Help me with this if you have I know we're past 9 o'clock, but there's all kinds of things I would like to talk about, but I can't do it without questions. So if you don't give me the questions, it's your fault that the talk sucks.
You talk about exploring deep consciousness, and we're practicing we're using the practice of meditation. So what's the difference between, regarding these levels, just observing and exploring?
If you're just observing, you are exploring, because nothing lasts. So anything that's rising in the mind stream does not last. And so that way there's some kind of a journey quality that is direct and going into that, into those deeper levels or dimensions. Whereas when we're grasping, rejecting, we're looking for particular things or looking for validation, it's circular. The universe is, to use a blunt term, the universe is very, very accommodating. Consciousness always finds its own form. And you're one of them. I'm one of them. It finds whatever, dependently arisen, it finds whatever form it needs. And you can awaken within that walnut. You can awaken within that cloud. You can awaken within that mountain. You can awaken wherever you're at. You can awaken. Do it. Awaken. How do you do that? You train your mind. And if you're listening to me, that you're probably doing that.
Bowing. I think your title was the ignored frontier.
Yes.
Is there a difference between ignoring a frontier and having a frontier not be available to you? Bowing.
It's not available because you're ignoring it. So I title it that. What are you, some kind of plant? Come in here to ruin my parade? You're not a plant. I know you're not a plant. If you were a plant, you would probably be a, what is that one kind of plant? A cactus. So you can ask the question again. Try to paraphrase it a little bit to help me go into the area that your question is actually about.
If someone has access to what I might consider deep consciousness, is that occurring in a different area than my experience?
Well, it could be occurring in a different area, to use that same term, than your experience, because we don't have, like when I meet people, I can see things that are happening with people that are having different kinds of difficulty. And I endeavor as a meditation teacher to come as close as I can to meeting them where they're at without reinterpreting it for them or without interfering it. We're trying to repair something based on my preconceptions of who they are. So therefore, everybody I meet is a stranger. Every time I meet you, it's like I've never met you before. Even though we talk about similar things, and it's not like I don't have a memory. But I'm looking at you, receiving what's happening there as if I've never seen that before. More about that if you have it. It's a good area.
It comes back to the question I had earlier, and
Okay.
it's so easy when someone has what I might consider a not normal experience, or it's different than
Yes.
what I would consider normal. That they're making something up or they're seeing something else.
Okay.
But what is validity in our perception?
It's a good question. And I would say that as far as validity, what is fundamentally true and what is relatively true, we just about have to go there. So the relative truth, validity comes from things like proof, or things like if it's wet, it's probably water, even though water is not wet. If it's, I mean, all the relative constructs that come up around that, that's the elaborations there are pretty infinite. But what is fundamentally true, the actual valid, as it's said in the tradition, valid cognition, to actually have a valid view of what is being perceived, there's no proof for that. But the way it's talked about conceptually is you're actually looking at what is looking is actually what is being seen. So the actual viewing aspect of subjectivity is the same and not different from the actual what is being viewed aspect of what is called objectivity. And it's not an experience that comes and goes. So therefore, it's difficult to get any kind of a qualitative or a quantitative idea about how much or how little or how often. But it's something that is there all the time, and we cover it up by being incarnated in this human form. It's quite an extensive cover up of that, and unless you stumble onto the spiritual path, meet someone who has met someone else who's met someone else, where there's some kind of a lineage or some kind of a structure. Without a lineage, I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but it's less likely. You need a strong form because it's easy to miss the whole thing, misunderstand the whole thing. Further question? I'll take one more and then we should close since it's
Maria Valley.
Yes.
Is meeting people where they are the same as giving them benefit of the doubt?
I would say so. Yeah, you meet someone who your first thought about them is they're mixed up or they're confused or but you could give them the benefit of the doubt and give them a chance to express themselves and ask them how they're doing and without being nosy, particularly depends on who it is and what all the other dynamics. How well you already know them, if it's some of you the first time you meet them. But isn't it? It's so easy. All of us know this. It's so easy to just jump to a conclusion about anybody. It's just much easier just to conclude something. How do I know? I do it. That's how I know about it. In that area of just less is better. You might not be able to stop that concluding thing about when you meet people, but you can be very, very aware of it. You can be aware that you have that particular knee-jerk situation going on. Someone who is really aware of how much they're continually forming things like that and forming things like that. If they watch it and they just see that they can't be somebody else, they can't get rid of that, they can't do away with it, then what generally arises in an area like that, whether there's spiritual path or not, although that would probably be somewhat necessary, would be humility. To see that you actually can't, you can't be somebody else. You have to be who you are. on the spiritual path that we're, the Bodhisattva path, we're talking about actually transcending that individuality. So it's no longer a solid being. Still there, just not real. Shall we go ahead and dedicate to merit? Thank you for your questions. This is kind of a difficult topic. I just wanted to have some more questions about deeper layers of consciousness, and I got a few, so thank you so much.